Well, Higher Education Minister Buti Manamela has just given us an update on the state of readiness in the sector for the 2026 academic year. Newzroom Afrika's Nqobile Madlala was at that briefing and she joins us now live. Nqobile, obviously the big issue is around, there are various big issues going into the next academic year, but right now the issue of NSFAS is certainly high up on the agenda, and the defunding of those students at the University of Johannesburg as one example.
Definitely, Michelle. In fact, the minister just going on the podium and saying that all those students that have been defunded, that's of course given that they were going to be funded by NSFAS, will be getting some assistance, as we understand that about 13 billion has been reprioritized to go into those needs. So I want to bring in now the CEO, Waseem Carrim, to speak to us about this. Waseem, just perhaps give us an idea in terms of the numbers. How many people were defunded, or how many people are you funding at this point, and where's this money going to go to?
Yeah, thanks very much, and good morning to you and to your viewers as well. So I think NSFAS has faced a significant challenge this year. It has been there in previous years, but it's been more pronounced this year in that you have more students qualifying for the scheme than the scheme has the ability then to be able to fund. And this impacted on a number of students. So NSFAS had to use very arbitrary mechanisms to be able to address the funding shortfall, right? This included students who applied during the TVET cycles, university students who applied during the TVET cycles, students whose registration data came through after the registration closing date of the 31st of March, and students who had appeals that had been approved but that could not be funded here. And that ultimately led to blocked registrations. As we moved on in the year, it also impacted on students who needed to register modules for the second semester. So the amount was quite substantial in nature, close to 13 billion rand, which needed to be reprioritized. To give you a scale of how big that amount is, had VAT been increased by 0.5%, it would have brought in about 13 billion. That's the size of the NSFAS deficit here. So substantial steps had to go into place to ensure legal and compliance with that reprioritization process. But as the minister would have indicated, we are pleased that that process has now been completed, which means those students can resume their studies. And it's a significant effort to stabilize the 2025 academic year. It also has downstream impacts on, for example, student accommodation providers, which we can also ensure that they are paid. All of this being said, it doesn't deviate from the fact that NSFAS needs a sustainable funding framework. We can't have this situation reoccurring in future years because it just creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of tension within the sector.
And that's important because you obviously have to put in some assistance to ensure that this doesn't happen anymore. And we understand that the war room is supposed to serve that. But is it enough? Because we've seen this on a yearly basis.
I think South Africa has to grapple with the fact of a number of things, right? So at one level, you have a basic education system that is doing better, and we should be proud of that, right? We should be happy that South Africa is producing more bachelor passes year on year. But what you also have is that more students are being pushed into the NSFAS threshold, or more households are being pushed into the NSFAS threshold because we have a economy that's not performing, and we have a cost of living crisis, right? And you also have state resources that are declining in real terms, and you have competing priorities within the state, right? People who are unemployed want the social relief of distress grant to be increased, right? There's a lobby for the national health insurance, Basic education requires early childhood development. These are policy decisions that need to be made, right? Of course, higher education is important and it needs to be funded. Some of the other nuances we need to take into account is that today 1 in 2 NSFAS beneficiaries is not graduating. And what is the loss to the state of that investment that is not generating a return for us? So I think there's a number of fundamental questions that we need to answer. And these are not things that are going to be answered in the next 3 months, by the way. I think ours is to put together a medium to long-term sustainable funding and financing framework for the higher education sector. What we're saying is that we'll bring the relevant role players together to ensure that we at least have some mechanisms that are in place next year to prevent a reoccurrence of this situation, at least in the short term.
Thank you, Waseem, for giving us those great details. That is the CEO of NSFAS, Michelle, giving us details around the funding. So 13 billion has been made available so that people can actually be assisted with that funding issue.
Nqobile Madlala, thanks for that. Let's see how that translates into practical help.